Yes. Fatima, can you introduce yourself?
Okay.
Alex.
Buenas tardes, mi nombre es Fátima y yo soy coach de matemática aquí en Guatemala y es un gusto estar aquí y perdón pero Alex va a traducir por mí.
Yes.
Yeah, how's your Spanish, James? No.
No.
So it's Fatima.
Hero Spanish.
So that's Fatima, our coach in Guatemala. And she said I was going to translate for her, which I did.
Yeah.
So.
Hey, Alex, go ahead and introduce yourself.
So I'm Alex. I am from the States originally, but I'm based in Guatemala, and I'm the director of programs here on the ground, or education programs here on the ground in Guatemala. So I work a lot with Fatima here with our Guate team.
Okay,
Nice
that's it's a very interesting ceiling behind you.
Oh yeah, it's the oh my gosh, the skylight. It like goes way up, and then just like all the light comes in. Yeah.
Is this your apartment or is this a hotel or?
It's my house.
Es un hotel.
Oh, that's your place.
Let's just say that for all the negative things that Corona has brought, it's made tourist towns very inexpensive. And Antigua's a tourist town. So no tourism here has changed things for people who normally don't live in houses like this.
Sad, really. Anyway.
I didn't realize that. I thought you were at the hub, but my guess is it's closed, huh?
Yeah, everything is still closed here. So.
Well, at least you guys understand why that should happen. Yes. Portland was wonderful, though. They were very, very responsible. Callie, can you introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, so I'm Callie. I am also originally from the States, but now I've been living and working in Ecuador for a couple of years, and I am our Director of Global Partnerships. So I see all of our work on the education side.
Okay. And what state were you originally from in the US?
North Carolina.
You were North Carolina. And you, Alex?
I'm from Seattle, Washington.
Oh, Seattle. One of my favorite cities. Yeah.
I love it too. I'm so sad I can't go back for who knows how long. Sad.
You should stay away.
Yeah.
Paul, can you introduce yourself? Are you able to hear? I know Paul is texting us.
Yeah, I'm having some problems. I just hear you.
Okay.
But I'll try. Hi, everyone. I'm Pau. I'm Ecuadorian and I live in Quito, Ecuador. And I am the Director of Partnerships here in Ecuador.
Thank you, Pau.
But I'm also working in programs. Yeah.
Yep, you are. You're doing great things. We met Pau about 3 years ago. Callie and Pau were on the same first trip with us.
Oh, wow.
James, can you introduce yourself just to everyone? I sort of sent a little email introducing you, but it'd be great to hear from you.
James Burnett. I trained as an elementary school teacher. My first year of teaching was 1990. I then went back to full-time study in mathematics education. That's my alarm that tells me I've got to turn my eggs off, otherwise they're gonna. So I completed a master's degree in education, mathematics, primary. We say primary, you say elementary. If I ever say primary, you know it means elementary. That's K6, that's what we say. I started the company in 1995, so it's 25 years old today. And I was probably invited to this session today because Chad knows that we are strong in procedural fluency and conceptual understanding because that's what we started the company on. We made visual models and things, cards and representations that students and teachers can use, and that's how the company got started. So we were way ahead of its time. In 1995, people weren't even talking about that. Mm. So we just started as professional learning. So just teaching. I remember training teachers in Jeffco, Colorado, and I had these cards made on tag board, and I had them do a make and take. So they were making the cards, the visual models, teach you basic facts, and they said, "Look, can you make these for us?" And that's how that got started. We started publishing materials. I incorporated the company in the US in 2004, so that came much later. And then it wasn't until the Common Core came along that we developed a core program called Stepping Stones. I hope you've seen it, you've got access to it. Mm-hmm. and that really gave the company a kick along. We moved very quickly then with major adoptions in like Fairfax, Hawaii, Albuquerque, Fort Worth, right across the country, big adoptions of our approach to teaching mathematics, which is nice. So I've just lived and breathed mathematics education primary for about 30 years. So I founded the company with my a friend and mentor, a senior lecturer. He's in his late 70s now, and his wife, who's an early childhood specialist in mathematics as well. So I lived with them before I got married in 1995. So I just had a great opportunity to learn a lot about how to teach mathematics.
Great.
Married with 3 kids, and I'm up here at my farm at the moment. So I often speak to Chad. I'm up here at the farm, so I'll give you a little taste of.
You're gonna be jealous.
Sun is just starting to pop up.
Yep.
I don't know if you can see it.
Look at that.
Wow.
It's just starting to raise his head. So it's always pretty this time of day, as it is at the end of the day when I'm having a glass of wine. This is the place for us.
Good place to be.
Yeah.
Yep.
Hey, James, is your daughter still doing that YouTube series, Gemstones?
Yes, Gemma. Yes, she. In fact, we're releasing a program called Rigor Connects. When the COVID hit, we in 2 weeks between our Australian team and US team developed an at-home solution specifically written, for that situation, and we got a huge amount of people using it. We didn't require login details or any of that. It was not about selling or marketing, but a lot of people logging in. So we're creating now a premium solution of that, and she's having to create a lot of videos for that program. So yeah, so my youngest is my daughter as well. Her name's Gemma. She was born on my birthday, so she's my little gem. And she creates these. She's 16 years old, so she creates these videos for students, young students, and I curate them to make sure they're on message. So she edits some films. I'm not even allowed in the room when she films them. She gets all embarrassed, so she does it on her own, and I have to edit them later.
Yes, that would be a great thing to put in Spanish at some point, or for us to do a Spanish version of them, pretty much following along. And I know that you've given us permission to do that. Yeah,
absolutely. Because they're in YouTube, I think you can click on translate and Google will do it automatically for you, but it's never a really good translation, is it? But if you're they're about 2 minutes long, so if you provide the transcript, we might be able to put it on the bottom. I don't know. But anyway, figure that out in the future.
Yeah, that's great. Well, let's get started. Thank you guys for doing that. And I'm glad that you guys are meeting James directly, because I know he's a great resource, and Sarah Moore is a person you've worked with, many of you. So she's a pretty important person in his organization. So let's get going. And the 1990s version of myself as a teacher was excited to read this bit, because I was like, finally, the lectures I did weren't so bad. But I think they're telling a different story. What do you think about that? What story are they telling? So you guys, one of you guys jump in, feel free to. How's this different from lecturing?
It makes me think about conversations that I have with parents, and in general, people in the general public who are, for example, anti-Common Core in North Carolina, and who really complain about all of the steps that their kids go through to learn to multiply 2-digit numbers, for example. And I think what it always comes down to that they are missing is that what we're talking about and what this is talking about is emphasizing is that it's not that we don't ever use the algorithms. It's not that we don't ever get there, but we don't start there. So you have to build an understanding of the math and what's happening, and make sure that that conceptual understanding is there before any of those tools are introduced to students, so that when they're introduced in a way that actually makes sense.
Okay, that makes sense to me. So starting with conceptual understanding, and then to build conceptual understanding, those are the other things we've talked about: meaningful task and discourse and multiple representations. Is that what you're thinking?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and a lot of times I'll ask my friends who have kids in school now, like when they're frustrated about it, and I'll say, well, can you explain to me why you multiply two-digit numbers the way that you do? And they have no idea. And they're just like, because these are the steps that you follow, and look how quickly I can do it. And I'm like, but you can't tell me why? You don't know why? And so I think that like goes to show that it's not that we don't want to get to fluency. That's also important, but it's just not first.
What else? Paul, we had this conversation a little bit a couple of weeks ago about where do you start with a new topic that's sufficiently complicated? Does this sort of, can you talk about that? Oh, it looks like Paul is coming in audioly. Can you hear us, Paul? Oh, she left. Okay. Well, when she comes back, we'll talk a little bit about that. Do you remember that conversation, Callie? Were you part of that, or Alex? You know, did we start with a very complicated topic? Do we start with maybe direct instruction and then move to discovery, or vice versa? Paul, can you hear us now?
Hi again. Sorry, I'm really
That's
having
fine.
problems here. I just changed my connection, so I hope now I'm not gonna leave the room anymore. I hope so. Did you say something to me?
Yes, I was talking about our conversation that we had a few weeks ago about where do we start? Do we start with direct instruction and move to discovery for complicated new topics, or do we start with discovery and then move to direct instruction? Does this section of reading help inform that at all? And if so, how?
Yeah, well, I when I was reading, I thought, of course, we need to understand first. When you ask this question about how to start, we need to understand. We can't just jump to the whole algorithm or the formulas that usually classrooms and teachers start with. But there's a kind of process that is not just you start understanding and then you go to the fluency process. How do you say that?
Procedure.
Yeah.
No, procedure. That is a really hard word to say. So sorry. So it's not just something goes first and then something goes next, and that it's a kind of a dynamic process. So what I think is we are going back. Are you hearing?
Yeah, we hear.
I'm still having problems because
You are.
all free.
Right. But we're hearing most of what you're saying, Paul. So, James, tell me, like, how do you guys find the balance between conceptual understanding and procedural fluency as an organization?
We find it pretty easy because you focus, in my opinion, you focus more heavily on the conceptual understanding, and the fluency will come later. If you read you know, the current documents, even the support material for the Common Core talks about rigor. You know, programs mathematics needs to be rigorous, and well, what's that mean? Well, they define it as a balance. That means an equal share of conceptual understanding, procedure, and application. I don't know if I necessarily agree with that. This represents all your teaching, you know, and you basically have a third on each. I think if you focus more on the conceptual understanding, you don't have to give as much time to the procedural. They truly understand it, then they will come up with their own procedure anyway, even if they don't recall the one which we teach. We formally teach. So that's always been our focus. You know, if you use representations, if you have them struggle, like you said, you asked the question before, you had discovery first or direct instruction, or I think you framed the question the other way around. I'd be letting them, you know, struggle a little bit with a problem that helps them understand it before you, and they should be, you should be posing the right questions to get them thinking about it before you start showing a way. I won't say the way, but a way to do it. And over time, you might show multiple ways before you get to a procedure. The reading you had us do was heavily focused on the multiplication algorithm, I thought.
Yeah.
as a procedure. So there's so much you can do. So much you can do before you get to the formal written algorithm.
Right.
And I class that as being very, it's all conceptual understanding, isn't it? All that array work, which they were talking about in the reading there. And that's all things that we do in our materials too, to answer your question.
Yeah.
Sorry, I talk too much. If you ask, I'll talk.
That's
so
good. That's exactly right. That's why you're here. You're the expert in the room. And speaking of the expert in the room, Linda, I wanted to ask you, because if you can hear us and are able to talk, because we talk, you and I talk a lot about, especially with regard to the work we do in Galapagos, what's the sort of balance between, conceptual understanding and then contextual understanding, sort of the mathematics. Like, not every mathematical understanding needs to be set in a context, right? There's sometimes we just do pure numbers. Can you tell us, can you describe some of the work you've done in Galapagos and how they've received that?
Yeah. So I was thinking about what James said and what you just asked me. I do think that contexts help kids to get the conceptual understanding of what's going on. Even if I'm doing a number talk, which is just working with, an equation like 6 minus 2 3/5, which is not very easy to do procedurally, but if you think about it conceptually, in fact, I would say procedurally is almost the inverse of what common sense tells us to do. But it's also helpful, I think, for kids to have a context in which to base that. If they can draw a mental picture, whether it's pies or, I'm sorry, but pies seem to be the fraction context of choice. But I do think, in line with what James said, the application, it's not like we teach a procedure and then conceptual and then give the kids the application. The application and the conceptual, I think, promote each other. And I don't want to eliminate the need for, I think, to be able to conceptually understand a particular computational skill. The context might be just using manipulative materials. It doesn't necessarily have to be a story problem type of situation, but if I'm working with fraction circles, so to speak, and you use that example I just gave, the fraction circles might help me figure out what I need to do to be able to solve that. So I take away the 2, and then I have to figure out how do I take away the other 3/5, or how do I compare those two for a comparison situation. So in the Galapagos, that was fairly new to teachers, and I worked with the primary level teachers. But so the idea of even place value using straws and bundling and unbundling was relatively new to teachers, but I think they had a deeper understanding of what was going on. And I was just so pleased when Miriam sent us pictures of teachers doing that in their classroom.
Yeah.
And so it was a little bit procedural because we had to set up the understanding of what was going on, but it was also building the conceptual of what's actually happening when I have to take apart a 10 and make 10 ones, or when I have to bundle 10 ones and make a 10. So I do think that they're interrelated, but I also feel that there's an order that helps to build understanding. And I would also add that I've changed a lot in my own thinking about how kids learn. Some kids do not learn procedurally. The algorithm will never make any sense to them. So if we can help them to understand what's going on, and they can use their own algorithm or their own strategy, I think there are a lot of kids that need that, and we have to be willing to let them do that. And that may mean we have to veer away from whatever textbook or I'm really thinking of the more traditional textbooks that they're using. I don't know if I answered your question or not, but
you did, and you went and took another one of my questions that I thought was going to be really clever. Thanks a lot, Linda.
Sorry.
You can
pay me later.
Go ahead, James. Yeah.
I'd go as far as to say, just building on what Linda just said, that most children, in my opinion, most children don't learn procedurally. And they're not some, the vast majority don't, and the vast majority of us as adults do.
Yes.
You really always seek understanding. And I totally agree with Linda. Is in two things: is the application doesn't, the learning doesn't have to end with the application. You can front load the application, as I said. So you have the students struggling with a particular context. And my third point I want to make here is as Linda said, the context does not have to be cultural or anything. Mathematics is a context in itself.
Yeah. Good.
And to give you an example, just yesterday I was writing lessons to address standards here in Australia, and they had to write a lesson on counting in skip counting twos. So we chose the context of shoes in twos, because shoes come in twos, so you just skip count pairs of shoes. How many shoes are there, and you count the pairs. That's very contextual. But then we struggled because then they wanted, ridiculously, I thought, that they wanted to skip count of threes. There might be a reason to do that, but not right then. And there's other patterns you might do first. And we struggled to come up with a nice context that the kids would understand. So we just use a hundreds board. Mm-hmm. And use the hundreds board and explore the patterns on a hundreds board. And so mathematics itself became the context. Yeah,
I could see that. Context is really valuable, but it's a starting point. And then the one thing that I thought about, I think it's implied in this reading, is we talk about the algorithm. What's the subtracting fractions from a whole number algorithm? But really, it's more an algorithm. And I think, like the example Linda gave, my algorithm that I would use would probably be a little bit different. That's what the power of number talks are. Is to understand how do I move from describing something to an algorithm. But it seems to me like, from my experience working in the places I've worked, seeing in Nepal, Guatemala, and Ecuador, teachers have an algorithm. They teach that algorithm, and if you vary from it at all, then you're wrong. How do you guys, is that something you see? And if so, how do you move teachers from that?
I'm thinking of El Paradon and Linda. Do you know what I'm going to say?
You guys, James, we've got to get you to El Paradon.
But I think it's just like a really clear example that is brought up repeatedly in these sessions, right? Like when we're in El Paradon, it's like in the third grade classroom, they're going over long division, just like a very clear algorithm. It has its steps, it has the things that you're supposed to do in each part of the problem, and that's it. And that was the only thing that the teacher was focused on when we were observing her class, or in the couple of occasions that week that we were observing the class. But it's definitely the focus was on those particular steps, and correct meant that you were following those particular steps, which is exactly what you're saying, Chad. The procedure, how well did you follow the procedure, right? And there was no room for a different response or a different way to approach the problem. It was just that procedure, and that's it. So yes, to answer your question, I think we've seen that in a lot of classrooms, and we continue to. And then that's kind of what determines if the student is correct or not, rather than any of the other whys behind that.
And so the division algorithm is one of the first ones I learned as here's an algorithm that we teach our kids that I bet you don't even understand the mathematics of it. Does anyone even understand the mathematics of the division algorithm?
When I can use an area model and show what's happening there. Yes, yeah. I know the first year that I taught fourth grade, nobody in my class learned how to divide. I feel terrible about how those children left my fourth grade class. Yeah, and by my third year teaching fourth grade, we were rocking and rolling, and I felt like by the end, most of my students really understood division. But that was my problem, was that my first year, I didn't know what I was doing, and I just tried to teach them to memorize the steps, and it was wildly unsuccessful. And so then when I started looking for other ways, it really transformed learning, and it became something that was exciting instead of painful in the classroom.
Yes. James, do you guys even use the division algorithm in your curriculum?
Yes, unfortunately, but it's funny that Alex mentioned that one first up, because I was thinking about that. It's the number one question I ask to teachers when we're talking about 21st century skills. So I ask them, when was the last time you personally used the long division algorithm? Not to teach it, not to help your grandchild or daughter with homework. When was the last time you personally used it? And I had fun with them. I say, anyone, hands up? Anyone yet today? Coming here today? No. Yesterday? No. Last week? No. And I usually have a group of up to 100. Last month? No. Last year? No. Last decade? No. Last century? And I'll have one person usually put up their hand. And I say, really? How much time do we devote to A, teaching it, and B, practicing it? You know, and yet we don't need it anymore. When I was a child, we had to have it because we didn't have these things. Or calculators. We all carry these now. And if the numbers are that messy, anyone will reach for this before they... In fact, I don't even carry a pen. We used to carry pencils on us. Builders would have a pencil in their ear. Teachers have a pencil in their pocket. You don't carry that anymore. You carry this. So if the numbers are that messy, you can't handle it mentally, you reach for a tool. The tool could be paper and pencil, but in this day and age, it's technology. You know, and it's far more accurate than we are. So, yeah, it's frustrating. It really is. You know, they're reviewing our national curriculum right now. I just wrote an opinion piece for it. And I just hope that is removed finally. It's just a waste of our time. We should be doing thinking activities rather than that sort of stuff, you know.
I think it's a good tool for number theory, because if you can understand it, that's a valuable thing, breaking things apart. But only maybe if I'm going to do advanced statistical analysis and develop a statistical model or some sort of calculus thing. But that's maybe it.
Other ways to bring about that thinking, but yeah. But anyway, that's my opinion. That's not a. I don't know if I represent. Linda may not even agree with me, but it just annoys me.
Linda's like, what do you think, Linda? About? I mean, yeah.
So my favorite talk that I ever gave, I might need to resurrect it, was entitled "Life's Too Short for Long Division."
That's great.
I have to admit, I stole it from somebody else who gave me permission to use it, but the room was packed.
Linda, can I have permission to use that?
No, because I may resurrect that talk again. You can use it, but not as a title to one of your talks.
Okay.
And I take no claim for being original, so I have no business giving you or not giving you permission. As I think about it, and I think about the teachers who asked me, who really struggle to quote unquote teach it. We've had that conversation about, do we really call it teaching?
Yeah. Right.
But I do think there are some interesting things that kids can learn as they do it. I don't think we need to give them ridiculous examples, but I think there's a reinforcement of the understanding of place value. And I think this whole idea of the meaning of division can be reinforced. And I think for some kids that are ready, you know, it can be an extension, but I think if you know, I suppose I do long division once in a while because I forget my phone as a calculator. Or I may want something other than a decimal and may want to know how many are left over. So I don't totally want to throw it out, but I don't think it ought to be critical to how we evaluate kids and their success in mathematics. So if some kids can do it and make sense out of it, that's great. And if other kids cannot, it shouldn't be a critical skill, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Because boy, when I taught fourth and fifth grade, I taught mostly fifth grade, but I know the fourth grade teacher spent a tremendous amount of time on it. And I can't tell you how much time I spent on it, again, when the kids got to fifth grade. And then when I taught fifth and sixth grade, how many kids came to, and these were not inner city kids. These were pretty bright kids. How many kids came to sixth grade, still didn't understand, so they couldn't do the procedure, or they were taught some mnemonic device that made absolutely no sense to them. Right. And I thought to myself, how much time have I wasted on this topic? When quite frankly, they can pull out whatever it is they have in their pocket, if they understand what's going on and know when it's necessary to do this, that they don't have to sit there and try to do it by hand, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yes, I agree. And there are 2 points I want to get to. One about the multiple algorithms. But the second thing, and the one I talked about first, is I saw a story about a teacher who received $1 million grant to explore the idea of teaching kids algorithm through singing and mnemonic devices. And I wanted to hear what your thoughts were about that. What do you guys think about that idea? How does that fit with what we're reading today? Does that build procedural fluency?
So my immediate response is, I just have to say this because I've said this about other grants in my work at the university when we were applying for grants. Whoever was the person that granted the money,
yeah,
the benefactor, I guess is the word. In my opinion, they should have just opened the window and thrown the money out because it would have been a whole lot easier. That's just, I've said that more than once about silly funding going to insane projects. So do you want me to really tell you what I think? No, I'm kidding.
Well, no, hold on. Yeah, I know. Well, you're not supposed to get the answer yet. But that's good. Yeah, that's what I'm thinking too. What do you guys, so anyone want to be so bold as to contradict Linda or me with that idea? Or do you agree with that? Alex has a contradiction.
I have an idea.
Go, Paul.
I'm not
I know, I'm teasing. I'm teasing, Alex. I'm just trying to call you out. Go ahead, Paul.
When you ask why is this idea different what the book says right now from what's going on in the regular class?
Yes.
Math class. I was thinking when they really want to go or work on fluency, then they will just do 100 of exercise the same type and just ask them students to do those kind of exercise over and over again, and
right.
It's all bored. So I do agree it's really important to work on this, not on this 100 exercise, but to work on fluency.
Right.
And when I'm thinking how we can work on that, sometimes 2 or 3 exercises will be fine, but sometimes reaching or trying to find games or different ways to work on this, that's when songs or this kind of things can fit on. Like you can learn quite things, really small part of math. Well, not math, but that reminds me my son. He really loves listening to music when he want to learn or memorizing things. So memorizing is fine. The problem is starting with that and using this a lot of time to memorize things. So I do think it's a small part. Playing games, painting, or using songs could be a funny way of working on fluency. But
right.
that's
After you have understanding. Right. Well, yeah, go ahead, Alex.
I thought of one example that isn't necessarily contradictory, but it's like I can think of it's like a teacher that we work with, who some of you guys may know. It's Blanca, who is in Milpas Altas, and she's been like in the working with TTT for like 4 years. And so in her classroom, she teaches kindergarten, and literally every class I've ever seen her teach, she starts out with a song, and it's a math song. And I guess. Like I definitely hear the point about like that's not the way we want to memorize like procedures or like steps, but the way that she uses it is like to get the kids warmed up, to get them active, to get them moving around the classroom. They have like their steps that are like corresponding with what's said in the song that is like, like subtracting 2 steps, so they go back and then they go forward. And so I guess like I wouldn't use it as I don't disagree with what you all are saying, but I do think I have seen a couple examples of where that interactive aspect of it can be used in a way that is like effective or like motivates the learning in the class or something like that, maybe.
Yes, I think there's a distinction there because I see understanding happening beforehand rather than like just, okay, we're going to grind through this algorithm. And in fact, what I read was there were like 3 sort of conditions for procedural fluency. It's not to know the algorithm, but instead it's to be able to choose the correct algorithm, explain why that's the case, and then to get a correct answer. And that's a little different, I think, than what we often see. Do you guys agree with that? What do you think about that? Is that a better definition of fluency to you all?
I want to go back and just quickly appreciate Alex's point of view.
Mhm.
And I think that there are situations, I mean, I kind of blew it off, but I think there are situations where there are certain things that it might help kids to remember. And I think there are kids that really struggle to, quote, memorize things. And even if they understand, even if they have the conceptual understanding to figure out what 7 times 9 is, it's really hard for a lot of kids. And so if I can sing almost every Beatles song that was ever released. And when were the Beatles really popular? So, I mean, you know, that's stuff that I wouldn't normally remember. But I want to share with you quickly an example of a classroom I went into. It was a 6th grade classroom in California a couple of years ago. And the administration was singing the praise of one of the 6th grade teachers. And I was excited when I walked into her classroom because I felt like I walked into math heaven. And it wasn't long before I was extremely disappointed. I was with one of their math supervisors at the time, and she was giving the kids some warm-up things to do while she was walking around checking their homework. And a couple of them had to do with, a couple of the examples she had up on the board had to do with division of fractions. And none of the kids could remember how to divide fractions, which is a tough algorithm. And if you don't understand why the algorithm works, there's all kind of crazy concoctions you can come up with.
Yeah.
To think you're dividing fractions. But she said, boys and girls, now let's stand up and do the division dance, the division of fractions dance. And I got to tell you, I just looked at the math supervisor, and I know him well, so I could tell he was embarrassed, but it was the dumbest damn thing I'd ever seen. And it had absolutely nothing to do with helping kids to understand what was going on. And to this day, I've actually looked it up online, and you can find it if you look for the division of fractions dance, song and dance. And so I think you have to make choices about what's really helping to reinforce kids with essential information, and maybe something like a basic fact that they can't remember, versus just teaching rote understanding with absolutely, or not understanding is the wrong word, rote procedures without any kind of understanding at all. Because I can divide fractions, but if I don't know when I have to divide fractions, standing up and singing that song and thinking about what number do I invert and multiply doesn't help me at all. Because when I have to divide fractions, I'm not going to understand when I have to do that. But I will never forget that experience. Just never forget it.
The big problem is if you get the tune, or you forget the, you know, if you get it, you can't reconstruct it because you don't understand it. I mean, we would chant our you know, basic facts or tables, you might know them as when we were kids, and you know, some of us would just hum along because we couldn't remember the words. You know? It didn't work for me. Can I share a slide?
Yes, yeah, please do. Let me give you.
I think I could just press share screen.
I think I need to make you co-host.
I think I can just share screen. I've done this before.
Okay.
So you should be able to see this slide.
Yep, I see it.
And
Good.
I'll have to remove all these images here. So do you know the book by John Hattie? Now, Sarah Moore is one of those co-authors. Have you done a study on that book?
No, not yet. That's a great next book, though.
Well, you need to do it. I don't want to take your time, but I just want to quickly. So John Hattie is a generalist. Actually, Linda, you're one of the authors too, aren't you?
Yes, yeah.
Oh, okay, great. So you know about this. But anyway, this is not in the book. This is online. So, and Sarah dug this out for us. So basically, they studied studies as, you know, it's a meta study, and there's something like, I can't remember, 300,000 students or something. A huge number, like 90,000 studies. So the pool of students is that large. You just can't argue with this data. So when it comes to memorization, if you use memorization, how am I going to do this? If you use it as an instructional strategy, and that's what I'm hearing you're talking about. Like I've heard someone say the word learn. Oh, yes, we can use the songs to help them learn them all. And then you have to define what learning is, I guess. But if you use it as an instructional strategy, you're virtually having no effect at all. That's almost at zero.
Yeah. And
then someone else in the group here was talking about if you use it later, and if you do use it as a consolidation strategy, and that way you give them understanding, and then follow it up later on, then it's actually extremely effective. anything in the purple zone is highly effective. So 4.4 is what you would expect students to be learning after 1 year of school. So if you go beyond that, you're getting more return for your time. So you're almost up to 2 years of learning for every year they're at school, right? You're almost at 8/10 there. So that's very effective as a consolidation strategy. But if you're trying to teach the children using a song or something like that, it may be motivational, and someone in the group mentioned that. It may have other benefits, but to help them learn and understand something, no, almost zero. And it's been proven with a pool of over 300,000 students around the world.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It's something for you to think about. And honestly, you really need to do a book study on that. And
So I do want to add, though, I think, and Sarah and I had a lot to do with thinking about it in terms of mathematics book. And I don't work on it a whole lot anymore because I was pretty vocal about Hattie's work focused, in fact, I met him and we got into quite a debate about certain issues. It focused a lot on English language arts. So like using mnemonic devices was really high on that scale. And everything is relative. It's how they're used. But please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. Helps me once in a while, but it doesn't help me understand conceptually what's going on.
Yeah.
Divide, multiply, subtract, bring down, and all of those mnemonic devices that go with it help me to learn procedures, but they don't help me to really develop conceptual understanding. So I agree with a lot of what he says, but I think some of the strategies that they have in that particular book are more English language arts based than they are mathematics. So I think it's an interesting study. I think his work is very interesting, but I think like everything else, we have to really approach it with caution. Everything that works in English language arts does not necessarily work in the mathematical sciences.
Right.
So I just wanted to make that my feelings on that.
Yeah. Well, my takeaway is start with understanding. I mean, if we go with the book definition of what is procedural fluency, it really isn't like do the algorithm. It is select the proper algorithm and justify why you're using that. You can't do that unless you understand. And you also have to have more than one algorithm, which is, I think, something that was interesting to me. I actually loved the accessible algorithm for multiplication. I've never seen it. And I'm sort of disappointed that I hadn't, because to me, what do you think the teachers that you work with would respond to that algorithm? Do you think that would be meaningful to them? Any of you guys who were working like internationally, like, do you remember that? That is the one where you basically break the numbers apart. You know, like 48 times 68 is really 40 plus 6. I mean, and 60 plus 8. And Paul, you know, doing it as an advanced mathematician, you know how important that skill is, right? But do you think that the teachers in Guatemala and Ecuador would respond to that as a meaningful algorithm?
I think.
I'm
Go
sorry.
ahead, Paul.
Go
No,
ahead.
Daddy. The ones, so since that one looks really similar to the, like the,
Yes.
their model above.
Yes, it is.
Right. So we've done, I mean, just based on, like, we did this one with some teachers in Alta Verapaz like a few months ago. And it, like, not to say that this is going to happen with every single teacher, but it definitely, the ones that we were working with, like when they got it, when they saw it, it was like this mind-blowing thing. Like they got really excited about it. It was like, oh my God, like this is, like, I can see it, right? Like seeing it in this different way. And so it did feel like it was like, this one teacher kept saying, like, I can't wait to show this to my students. I'm so excited. It's really going to help. Like, it's also like establishing the space for thinking about like literally area and other things that are built conceptually on this. So yeah, I would say, you know, I can't speak for every teacher that we work with here, but I have seen it really be an exciting thing for teachers to learn that have never seen it before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What were you going to say, Paul?
I agree with Alex. The idea of, and it's connected with what you asked before, and I think we never get there, how we can work with teachers to get there, because they think they work fluency just doing this kind of things. So how we can change these teachers, and how we get, with this example, when you give this kind of way of teaching multiplication, I think a way we can work with them is giving a lot of ways, not only this one. And the main idea, or the powerful thing we can do is doing the connection. So how this new model connects with the one you already know, and how does this connect with the geometrical one, and how does connect with whatever. So I also like the idea that Linda said about letting students to build their own algorithms. That's really great, and I love that idea. I use it a lot in my classes. Sometimes I just use their names on this algorithm. So for example, if it's just John using this, and John is from my class, I'll say, this is John's algorithm. Even if it's others' theorem, Pythagoras' theorem, I'll say, this is Mary's theorem. And then I'll say, well, I'm so sorry, but some mathematicians discover this before you, but we use this name for a long time. And then we need to do this connection between this whole different representations. So of course, I think they will love this, and they will use it when they have the opportunity to see them. Because as Alex says, I think most of our teachers haven't even the opportunity to see this kind of ways of solving. So once they see, but I think they have to see lots of them, this one and the geometrical one, and then making the connections.
Yes,
helping them make.
Yes, I'd like to tune a little bit of what you're saying to say, I think the teachers need to construct those algorithms, starting with the concrete models. And the one reason I'm so excited about James and Linda both being here today is they have massive sets of different kinds of algorithms that are based on this kind of thing, this knowledge. There's better addition algorithms and other things. And so using some of their resources are really valuable. Do you think the teachers, do you think it's critical though to get to the conventional algorithm here in this example? Because it'd be easy just to stop at the accessible algorithm. Do you think you should push them, the teachers at least, and students?
Creo que la pregunta fue que si el currículum lo adopta, ¿no? Algo así.
Es que sí se debe de, como que ya cuando llegan a esa parte de la tabla, donde se pueden ver eso de área, entonces sí se debe seguir empujándolos para que ya usen o descubren el algoritmo como final.
Sí, definitivamente creo que como maestros en ocasiones no nos damos cuenta de esos procesos cuando uno tampoco ha tenido como la guía. Entonces, llegar a ese punto y ver como la unión para que nuestros estudiantes lo descubran, pasaría con todos muy similar a lo que pasó con los maestros en Alta Verapaz. Entonces, creo que también es como un proceso nuestro que necesitamos como ese empuje, ¿verdad? Para que nosotros mismos nos demos cuenta y poder ayudar a nuestros alumnos de esa forma. Que
Se me va a olvidar leer eso. Okay. So Fatima's saying that as teachers ourselves, sometimes we don't realize the connections between those things, right? Between what the concept is and what that concrete base is, and then what the actual algorithm is. So teachers also need that push so that things happen like what happened with the teachers in Alta Verapaz. To make that same connection, they would have to go through the same, a similar process as what we're expecting from the teachers. ¿Y algo más que querías agregar?
Me corté también, perdón.
No, perdón. Y no sé, Pau, Cali, si yo perdí algo en la traducción también, o sea, pueden calificarlo.
Yeah. No, I think that's really critical, is for the teachers to go through that same process, especially if they've never experienced it. Because we say the teachers need to grapple with the mathematics themselves before they could teach it in this way. So I see a real reason to be able to at least understand the conventional algorithm, because you understand place value and how to deconstruct and reconstruct numbers, and and what that really means. So I have two more things that I want to talk about. I really want to hear your ideas about how you might teach an algorithm lesson. But there are a couple questions first of all, and one, I'm glad James and Linda are here because they can help us. The book really says, you know, here is an example on page 43. They describe like the basic like progression of understandings you need to have to understand what basic number is. And I was thinking about me personally, I don't understand each of those progressions myself. And I bet the teachers we work with don't even realize maybe that there is a specific defined progression. Do you think that's really critical to have that understanding, James and Linda, or what can replace it? Because we can't teach, I don't think, the progression of division and fractions and percentages to everyone.
So sorry, Chad. I was just trying to bring it back up again. The book pages. I don't. I just got that from you today, as you know.
Yeah.
But look, if you're talking about progressions, just if I could talk about progressions generally, we're all for developmental sequence and prerequisites. So if there is a defined progression there, I can only assume it's a a very well considered progression, and I'd be particularly interested in delivering that a developmental sequence of activities following the progression. That's not to say that all children will follow the same progression. And this is where it comes back to what someone said. Is a lot of this is professional learning for teachers, that they have to be well informed so they can, deviate from the path and go another direction for another child who might be skipping steps in the progression or just going another path. But you've got to start somewhere. So I'm all about that. Well, I should say Origo is, that what we do today builds on what we learned yesterday, and we're preparing kids for what we're going to give them tomorrow, rather than this, let's just jump in and try this, broad open investigation. Hopefully we'll learn the skills we need from this to do tomorrow's investigation. I'm not in favor of that myself. So progression is a good idea.
So what do we do with teachers? Linda, what were we going to say?
So one of the things I learned is later in my teaching career that I wish I had known as a student or early in my teaching career. When I think about progressions, especially with operations, I think so often kids don't really understand what an operation means, or if you go back to those tables, the different structures of operations, that subtraction can mean takeaway. It can also mean a missing add-in. It can mean a comparison. And if kids really understand those meanings of subtraction with whole numbers, maybe a better way to say it is when I first began teaching, it was almost like we got to chapter 5 in the book, which was always fractions. So we had done all the review work and building on computation with whole numbers, and then geometry always came in the middle of that, almost to give us a break. And then we moved into fractions. And I always had a laugh because now that I think back, it was almost like there was a Grand Canyon between what they had done with whole numbers and what was happening with fractions. It was like, okay, forget everything you've learned so far. Now we're going to study fractions. Where if you really understand the meaning of an operation, I don't even want to use the word procedures, but the meaning of the operation doesn't change if I'm working with whole numbers, fractions, or decimals. Mm-hmm. And you probably can add some other integers or anything else there. And I don't think when I like to think about a progression, it's almost a vertical progression, but I think it's so important, and I think an area that we miss and so many textbook programs miss is making those connections between the meaning is the same as what went on with whole numbers. So if I ask myself the same questions, I can figure out what's going on with fractions. And so to go back to your original question, I think that's one of the things I really learned from studying the standards deeply. But I also think the standards can be overwhelming to teachers, because I will tell you, I've looked at 3rd grade, 5th grade, and 6th grade. And as a classroom teacher, that would scare the living daylights out of me, because there's just so much to develop in those years. And I don't know if we give teachers enough time to really do that so those connections can be made. To me, that's what progressions, I've kind of taken on a different vantage point or viewpoint of what a progression really is.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't all have to happen in 1 year.
Right. Well, listening to both of you two talk about that too, I think of it maybe a little differently too. As a mathematician who is teaching, I want to think about what goes into the concept that I'm teaching and what knowledges I need to have. I remember when I taught 2 science classes and 2 math classes. I had a PhD in mathematics education and it was just picking up science teaching and figuring that out as I go. I spent 3 hours prepping for math and about 30 minutes teaching prepping for science, because science was a lot easier just because kids can access it differently. And I had to think about what the kids needed to know, who knew what, when did they need to know it, how do they need to access it in math. It's a much more complicated thing. And to be honest, I think that would be a really radical change for a math instructor to have fewer classes and more prep time than other teachers. But I think it's something that would be interesting. But so taking that idea, those of you like, Alex and Fatima and Callie and Paul and Naomi, how do you, like the teachers you work with, are they thinking about that? What are the knowledges kids need to know to learn this concept? And if not, what can we do to help them?
I want to say something, but not from the schools. When I work at the university, what you talk about right now was the main problem when teaching something in higher levels. When I was teaching math to engineers or students that were prepared to be an engineer, hard because we were at not high school, not primary, we were at the university. So what you're saying is really hard because as James said, we have to start in some point. And sometimes we have to decide, we cannot go back to some definitions that should be done in some grades. And that's kind of the things that some of our teachers said, but it's hard because you cannot go on if you don't understand really the basic things from math. So you just can't say, what you're saying is really important to understand what do you need in order to understand whatever you are teaching right now. Otherwise, you're just jumping or trying to build something without a basis.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Good point. I'm going to follow up on that in a second. Alex.
Yeah, I think it's hard. I mean, there's a lot of things that come into play here, right? Because there's always this pressure to like finish the curriculum and do what you're supposed to do in that year. And so I think a lot of teachers that we work with are really concerned about that always. And so it means that they're focused more on like where the student is supposed to be in that given grade level rather than where they actually are, rather than like focusing on the conocimiento previo, like the previous knowledge that the student might have and where they need to go. Instead of focusing on that, it's more where they should be and where they need to go. And so there's like this gap between what they actually are at and like where they should be. And I think that's a huge challenge, right? Because then the teacher, and that's everywhere. That's not just like in Guatemala, right? That's just
absolutely
like teachers that are, you have a kid that comes into class and they maybe don't know what they should like. So yeah, I think it's challenging sometimes with that because it's also like how much time do you dedicate to that, right? Like how much time do you dedicate to teaching the previous things that they should have learned so that you can get through the curriculum that you're supposed to get through.
What's the answer, James? So like when I was getting my PhD, I was like underneath the stadium, like we're all celebrating, right? And going to be hooded. And I was with Linda Gojek. I was with 2 equally great educators, or almost equally great, Susan Friel and Carol Malloy. And they, it was, instead of going, oh my gosh, what a great 8 years, and I'm so glad this is happening, I was like, okay, you guys, I'm trying to teach algebra to kids who don't even know how to add 3 + 7. What do I do? And so what do you do when you're trying to teach that? I know it's probably a new question for you.
Yeah, no, that's the goal. It's if you can answer that, the secret of the universe, don't you?
Yeah.
Oh, look, you just got to go back. Unfortunately, there's no point trying to teach algebra if they don't know those basic skills. It's just, you just have to go back. And unfortunately, we're not, our schools aren't resourced to enable you to do it. I mean, this is where teacher aides come into their own, and they work with those students trying to fast track them, or, every country has a different solution. Unfortunately, some have no solution. But the answer is you cannot progress until they have that. In fact, if you are trying to teach algebra, and I'm assuming you mean middle school algebra,
Right.
There's no point if they don't know the basic facts, because it's the basic facts they're going to use in everyday life. If they're in middle school still don't know algebra, they're not going to go down that path anyway, where they'll need it. But everybody needs numeracy, and that's the mathematics you use in everyday life. And you've got to be able to add, subtract, multiply, divide in your head, and do basic transactions. You've got to understand those operations, what it means. Like Linda was saying, the operations mean different things. It just sounds, $12 in my wallet, the thing I want to buy costs $18. How much more do I need? That sounds like addition. It's actually subtraction. Yes, you can add to solve it, but you got to know all that. So these are things we've got to spend our time on. So if by that stage they don't know it, then you're going to have to leverage every resource you got to get them to get up to speed. But at the end of the day, they're not going to use it in their career anyway if they don't understand that by that point. Mm-hmm. I'm sorry to say that's probably, I'm very controversial to say that, but it's reality.
Yeah, Linda, what do you think?
I have a question.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. What's your question, Callie?
Well, we can hear what Linda says, and my question was.
No, go ahead.
Okay, my question. Something we've been thinking about a lot across the board is, in the current situation of the world because of the pandemic and how education currently is, we have to reprioritize what we've been learning about and thinking about, because it's not possible to do everything at a distance, and particularly when there's a lack of connectivity, it's not possible to do everything that we could do in person. And so what are ways that we can be thinking about choosing the most important concepts from this and making what's something applicable that we can do with teachers right now who are trying to reach their students at home, keeping this in mind?
So I want to respond to that instead of the other question, because I'm so glad you brought that up. So I have a lot of teacher friends on Facebook and belong to a couple of math groups and follow some pretty progressive leaders across the United States and Canada.
Including me.
Say that again?
No, I'm not thinking. Forget it. I was being silly.
Oh, well, yeah, you too. But, I got extremely radical. And I have to tell you that overall, my political views aren't extremely conservative. But when it comes to education, I just feel that every second we're in a math class is so important. And we have to make the very best use of it. But I posted something online that said, how about if we all took a collective breath and just gave kids a year off? And I don't mean a year off from learning. I'm actually thinking about, and I'm working with the school district right now, and I'm going to propose this to them. They may fire me. But what if we took the stuff that kids have learned thus far in mathematics? I'm a fifth grader, and I'm kind of getting into fractions, and think about the geometric stuff they've learned, and develop some real projects for kids to work on that use those concepts and let them see how they're used in real life and develop a deeper understanding. And it would take a collective group to do that. Like, I couldn't do everything, but I could maybe think about something in some areas and actually let kids, rather than grind them through whatever the curriculum is, whatever the standards call for, let them go out and explore and really enjoy mathematics. And I was talking to Sunil Singh, I think that's how he says his last name, who's a pretty radical thinker. And I said, this would really allow us all to think about how, instead of pushing kids through curriculum, even for the very bright kids, a percentage of which doesn't make sense, they just figure out how to do it. And really let them play in that mathematical playground or take that mathematical recess that he talks about. And I know that's really radical, but I think it could have such a profound impact on education. And I think maybe even when you're working with your teachers, you know, to start to think about how can I make this without turning it into a quote story problem. How can I give kids an opportunity to really think about the place in their 10-year-old life or their 12-year-old life, not their future 25-year-old life, but the importance of mathematics in their life today. And I have kids that find me on Facebook and they say, remember when you had us plan a playground and we had to do this, that, and the other thing, and all the different concepts that were incorporated into that project? That's what they remember. They don't remember those lessons on long division. In fact, I think they prefer to, they have subconsciously banned those from their mind. But to me, we don't have to blow up the world and start all over again, but if we can incorporate some of those things about teaching, whether it's in the Galapagos or in Guatemala or in El Paradon, how do we bring mathematics to be alive in a 10-year-old or 11-year-old's life or a 7-year-old's life? And I think if we could get some really good brains together, including you guys, we could really come up with some cool things that kids could do.
Mm-hmm.
I just think that would be so exciting.
Yeah, I agree with that. Kelly's question, in my mind, it's a really good question to ask because it's just so relevant. Mm-hmm. We have to start deciding. I mean, I'm reading every day that schools won't be going back in America. You know, they're going to be, I just read Pennsylvania today, or was it Philadelphia, is they're going to start remotely, as is other areas like Round Rock, Texas. So you can't do it all. So what are the big ideas in mathematics that we should just focus on? And I don't know if there's one answer. Well, I'm pretty sure there's no one answer just for elementary school generally, but there are in each grade. Like when I get to 5th grade and 6th grade, should we be spending our time remotely going over, you know, units of measure? No, that's more relevant, I guess, for the lower grades when you start learning that. But, you know, probability, you know, fortunately in the Common Core, I don't know in Guatemala, but in the Common Core in America, they've taken that out. We still have it here in Australia. I wrote, again, that opinion piece I wrote about it yesterday. It's just ridiculous that we're focusing on that. But now in particular with COVID, we got to really narrow our focus. What are those big ideas we have to do? You know, is it number sense? And the reading you had us do, number sense or number talks was mentioned. And I think that's highly relevant. We've got to keep doing that. We can't do nothing, right? Because we know that students in the Northern Hemisphere, they lose up to 1/3 of their learning just for summer school break. Right. Imagine if you did nothing. You just lose so much. And that's, I might add, it's because they don't understand it. So they memorize it. And if you don't practice it, you forget it. So if they understood it in the first place, they wouldn't lose 1/3 of their learning, I would argue. But in any case, that's a really good question, Kelly. And someone needs to start, I can see some opinion pieces on that right now. So I can use for PR, start narrowing down what are the big ideas we need to focus on, and apply them in situations that Linda's talking about.
Yeah, and I'm going to go back. I'm going to give you a little bit of pushback on probability, because when probability disappeared in the 6th grade, I was really disappointed. And I'll tell you why. Not that kids needed to learn probability for probability's sake, but it was a context for so many concepts that they had learned or were learning that I could do so many activities with, and kids needed to understand fractions and needed to understand percentages. So it wasn't so much understanding the formal concepts of probability, but it was just such a motivational context. We played games, we pulled out the dice, the kids had to go back and think about changing fraction values to percentage values. And so even taking in geometry the same way, how important is it for a kid to understand symmetry in whatever grade it comes in, or adjacent angles in whatever grade it comes into? And really thinking about how can we use those other areas to really reinforce and let kids explore, because some kids are really geometric minded and they love that kind of stuff. But how can we use that to build on the other critical concepts that kids need at a particular grade level? And that goes back to the whole project-based thing.
Right.
And teachers are afraid to do that because you guys said it. I've seen it in Guatemala. I've seen it in Ecuador. We've got to cover the curriculum. don't have time for these projects. We've got to cover the curriculum.
Mhm.
And our teachers in the United States are exactly the same way, by the way.
Yeah, it
I
takes
don't-
courage to break away from that model. So,
And Ecuador's curriculum actually has a space where they have to do projects every year in every grade. I know some of the schools in Guayaquil, like every Friday, they have a 2-hour block that's dedicated to their projects. And they could do such neat things there, but it just turns into arts and crafts time because the teachers don't know what to do.
Right.
They don't know how to take advantage of that or how to use it.
I think you're not asking the, can I, the one thing so my answer when I taught this class is it fits well here actually, because I chose to really weave in context a lot more. So if the kids don't understand the pure algebra, they understand the application of, you're going to the movies and you have renting a bus, they could do that problem and they can make the connection. So that's the one thing. And also to push number sense at all times as a teacher. And I think it'd be valuable to have teachers answer that question. What are the most important things that you're teaching this year and why that you apply, that you use outside? In today's world, I think the tie-in even to this unit is we have lots of different, hypotheses for why something is working or why it's not. I mean, my brother believes hydrochloroquine is the deep miracle drug that doctors are not giving to people. And I cannot help him look at the multiple inputs to that information. That's sort of the same thing, right? You have a problem and you have lots of different ways to solve it. I have to pick the right one and then justify it to other people. And so I think it'd be worth teachers being able to say, what are the important things I'm teaching this year? How do I make a real world connection? And how do we tear that apart for the students? That would be, what are the 5 things or 4 things that are really critical? And then make it a play. Because I had a student say that same thing to me recently, Linda. I had him design a house. And that was the thing he remembered at 35.
Right.
Which is scary, the fact that I teach someone who is 35, but that's a different story.
So the other thing I would add to what you just said is when we hear the word algebra, I personally still kind of freak out because algebra was my first terrible experience in mathematics because it was taught so procedurally and I had no idea what we were doing. And I wish that across the grades we could really change that. We have at the early elementary level, but I don't know if teachers really understand that. This notion of what you were just talking about, it's really about algebraic thinking. It's really about how do I take a situation and I'm able to generalize it rather than just apply it to one particular context. And again, I don't even know if people who teach algebra understand what algebraic reasoning or algebraic thinking is about. But move away from this idea that I have to go through all these procedures, most of which to me as a student make no sense at all. If I learn how to do the procedure, I'll pass the course. But really transform that into this notion of algebraic thinking. And I would argue that 2nd and 3rd graders can think algebraically.
Mm-hmm.
If we can only rule the world. I remember Glenda Lappin, who was one of my math idols. As president of NCTM, she always visited schools, as did I. I don't know that they do that anymore, which is really unfortunate. But she was introduced to the class and the kids looked at her and said, "Are you really president of math of the world?" And I thought, oh God, if there could just be some of us that could use logical thinking and reasoning to kind of blow it up and start all over again. Maybe not, but. And I think that's what programs like you work on, James, and the kinds of stuff we advocate for really are trying to do.
Mm-hmm.
Really think about this as number sense and algebraic thinking and numerical thinking and geometric thinking and not just learning a bunch of procedures and algorithms, but thinking about this in a much broader sense. But our standards really won't let us do that because there is this test at the end of the year.
Well, it does take courage. Yeah.
It does.
Yeah. All right. So we have like 8 minutes left, and I have about 20% power, so I'm doing pretty well. What kind of questions? What questions? Do you guys have any questions or thoughts about this section, or why you have the people here, the experts?
Oh, just questions in general.
Yeah, questions in general.
I have one for the group. So one of the things we've been doing is talking about how all of these practices are interconnected. And I don't know, are we on our 6th or 7th week now?
7,
Or 7th session? And I'm wondering about how this practice, how you guys are thinking about how this practice connects to all the other ones we've talked about so far.
Nice.
That's a tough question, so I'm glad I'm not in the group.
Yeah, that's a very good question. What are your guys' thoughts?
Si me ayudaran un poquito a traducirla, podría yo.
Creo que Linda está comentando, en este punto ya hemos estado como en 7 sesiones y lo que queremos, la pregunta fue, en este punto, ¿cómo se conecta lo que estamos viendo con lo que hemos de alguna manera discutido previamente? ¿Estoy bien en la pregunta? ¿En la traducción, chicas? Okay.
Sí, pienso que sí. Sí.
Y yo creo justo en algo que de hecho ya mencioné y en recuerdo mucho el diagrama de las conexiones y de los arrows. I'm sorry, I started stuck at the Spanish. I didn't realize I was stuck. Oh, sorry. Then when I said arrows, then I realized I needed a word in English. Sorry. When we were talking about representations and we were talking about how connect things and how representations help to build procedural fluency. You mean procedural fluency? That's how I think it's best connected. And there's something I would like to say that I wrote, and you asked that before. You asked if students should stop there with this kind of, when you were talking about the math, the multiplication example, and you say, should students stop there? And I say, no, of course they don't. They need to go fluency. They need to gain this fluency. But this should be natural. They have to reach them naturally. Shouldn't be forced. And that's the problem there. They need to get there. They need to just jump steps because they feel they need them. They don't need them anymore. Not because they are forced to jump this kind of things. So that's why this understanding connects with this part. You need to understand in order to decide to jump and to use these formulas, because they are great when you already know how to use them and how you can select them from other formulas and try to decide if they were right or not. So I think when you ask that, but we never get there. So I really think it's really important to talk about the natural way of going on, when to stop and when to go on. And I think that's when the students feel they are ready to go.
Mm-hmm. Good, very nice. I like that.
Creo que si más o menos voy entendiendo lo que Pablo dijo, también ha servido de mucho el punto de personal, es como darme cuenta de cómo no todo lo que en su momento se me dijo a mí con todo este proceso que he llevado es como, o sea que paso a paso tiene un porqué y una razón de cada uno, y ver la importancia de ir como paso a paso y no ir como avanzado de una forma, sí, me voy como corriendo totalmente, no, sino que hay pasos que son muy importantes que tal vez uno no se da cuenta y hasta después uno reacciona y es como, ok, entonces es por esto que se tenía que hacer esto o se hace esto. Entonces. Perdón, Alex.
Okay.
No, está bien. Yo estaba sabiendo quién iba a traducir, pero está bien. So what Fatima is saying is that they're like not everything that like she had been taught or that is taught is like as simple as it seems. Like there are actual steps behind these things, right? There's actually like whys behind those steps. And so instead of just like speeding up through it and getting to that like end point, there's other things that are going to happen before that kind of lead you through like why it is this ultimate like saying, why is it this algorithm at the end. Por lo menos eso entendí, entonces espero que lo traduje bien. Creo que sí.
Yep. What else? Any other thoughts?
I mean, I guess I think all of this stuff is very connected, and it reminds me of what Linda said in a previous session when she said like the order of things in the book, like it could go a lot of different ways because so many of these things are built upon each other. So it's like there's bits of it in every chapter, right? There's things that we talk about that continue to come up, that continue to be relevant, that aren't just like one chapter and we leave it there. It's still relevant in all the other chapters, and it didn't necessarily have to be in the order that it's in, right? And so I think that just like every time that we have a learning lab, it feels that way because it is like, it's all connected. Like there's a part in this reading where they talk about the problems, how they should be fewer, but like harder problems. And that we talked about when we talked about meaningful tasks, and like, it just, everything is very much like interwoven throughout all the time. So
yeah,
there's lots of consistency in that, I guess.
At the end of each section, there is this teacher's role and student's role. And I always ask this question because I love it, but we never get a chance to talk about it. But basically, like in here too, like what are the teacher's roles and the student's roles? It seems like they're sort of similar each time. Like what are the roles of the teacher with regard to this?
One of the ones that really stood out to me connects back to like the representations and really thinking about that. So connecting student generated strategies and methods to more efficient procedures as appropriate. That made me think about our conversation about how the teacher is intentionally choosing how representation, like which representations are presented and when. And one of the most important things for students in all of that is not just seeing the different representations, but making the connections between them. And so I see that building here too.
There was another point, but now that Kelly said that reminded me, it came up in conversation when somebody said something about how not every student has the same, like needs the same like procession or the same, like they don't go about the problems the same way. And it took me back to when we talked about the map and like how we have this map and this final place that we're trying to get to, but everyone has like different ways or paths that they might take to get to it. So I guess that was another one that I think is relevant, but also is something that we're kind of like rescuing from previous conversations that comes into play here, right?
Yeah. In each of these examples, I really see, and with yours too, the teacher's job is to provide an experience and to guide through the experience and rephrase and really take the student's thinking and focus that. Whereas the student's job is to do the work, to listen to each other, to provide ideas, to come up with solutions, to understand multiple solutions. So it seems like every single time it's like teacher, listen to your students, facilitate, and then the students have to do. Do you guys see that?
Yeah, I mean, that's like the revolutionary part of the work, right? Because like, I don't know, I think here the pushback that we get a lot of the time is like these things we're talking about are centered around like empowering students to think about things on when, like apply things and question things and like have a completely different approach to life, to learning, but then later to life, right? Which is seen as dangerous in some places. And like here, the education system is definitely built around just do what you're supposed to do. Just like follow instructions, don't question it, follow the procedure. Like it's very intentional. So all of these other ideas that we always talk about in these meetings are like kind of upsetting the status quo, right? So it's like that too. It always makes you think about that because you see it in daily life here, just like how people are programmed to just like do what they're supposed to do. And it's so related to how they're taught in school, right? So
yeah, good point. Yep, that's a deep connection that we're trying to break down. Paul, what are you going to say?
Yeah, I was gonna say something similar what you said. It's all about shutting up and listen to your students, letting them talk, and helping them to explain their thoughts, and giving, of course, great high demand tasks. So that's all we're talking about it. We've been talking about since we very first started.
Yes, and now we're talking about what does that look like? Yeah, great point. I love that. Never say anything a kid can say. It comes back to that all the time, doesn't it? Yeah. But help the kids say the thing they need to say. Yeah. Great. Any other thoughts, James or Linda or anyone? Thank you guys so much for doing this.
You're welcome. No, it's very interesting listening in, and I think I've shared my thoughts. I've probably spoken too much, but
you were perfect.
And thank you for the invitation.
Yeah, I'm glad you could come. Linda, thank you as always.
You're welcome. And I just want to reinforce, you guys are amazing. The work that you do is amazing, and your level of conversations and understanding just blows me away. So I feel very privileged to be able to sit in and be part of the conversation.
Yeah, I'm very proud of what you guys are doing. And James, just so you know, what we'll do is we'll take this and do something similar with a group of Spanish-speaking teachers next week, I think. A group of you guys will lead that. And then Naomi takes this stuff, and so does Fatima, and weaves it into global math stories in English and Spanish. So we just did the Spanish one yesterday, Fatima. Nice job.
When you talk to those teachers, don't forget, life is too short for long division.
I love that. Yeah. James is the one who told you that.
No, Linda did.
All right. Yeah. See you guys later. I got to get back. I have to drive until about 4 a.m. Talk to you guys later.
Oh my gosh. Be safe, Chad.
All right. Take care.